Senator Smith.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to explain my vote.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just kind of want to recap how we kind of got here tonight. And several weeks ago, I heard from a lot of teachers saying that that they were 49th in the nation in pay, that they felt disrespected and unappreciated, and I got to tell you, my wife, who's a teacher, you've heard me say this, my brother and my sister, lots of people in my family who are all teachers. I know that because I've heard it from them for many years too. And I get how hard teachers work, and I live with it, and I see it every day. And we heard that. But I'd like to read you an email of what I was hearing. And these are the emails and the messages that I was getting constantly. Now, this is probably about the beginning of April. Yes, I got some before that and just in general when we talked about the budget, but really when the Red for Ed took off, I'm going to read a quote from an email. Quote, "The Red for Ed movement is asking for a 20% increase in teacher pay, not 1% or the laughable 0.4% from a couple years ago. This percent is to account for years of underfunding from the state to make our pay equitable to our peers across the country," and so on and so forth. So what did I hear from that? And what did we hear? I heard we're 49th in pay, we're being disrespected, underappreciated, undervalued, pay us 20%. We heard it. You know who else heard it? Our governor heard it. And our governor stood up, held a press conference, said, you know what? You got it. Now, most times when you have a negotiation and the governor starts off, hey, I got you at 1%, and other people say, and the other side says, I want 20, sometimes you would say, oh, how about 10? But the governor, probably to the surprise of many, said, you got the 20. You got it all. Then after that point is when my emails started changing. My emails then started changing. It's the 20% plus and plus and plus and plus. My initial emails never had the pluses and the pluses and the pluses and the pluses. I understand people might want that now, but that was not the original ask that I was hearing loud and clear, and I don't believe it was what the governor heard. And the governor heard the 20%. He says, you know what, you're right. And he gave it to you. After the press conference, when he says, it will be in our budget, after this body in the House stood up, and people like me stood up, who said, I will not vote for a budget of the Appropriations Committee unless the 20% is in there. I heard that, and I agree. Let's do 20%. Even after that, that's when the strike happened. And I got to tell you, I heard from a lot of parents who said, now, wait a minute. Didn't I just hear the governor say this? And didn't I just read y'all press releases say that? Well, are you giving them the 20%? Is it an illusion? Are you giving it? No, we're giving it to them. Well, why are they striking? And I said, well, they want some other things now too. And that's how we continued to get to where we are today. Now, I agree. We have a First Amendment constitutional right. You have the right to petition your government for the redress of grievances. And you did a remarkable job with it. But I want to actually go through now what is actually in this budget that some people earlier today said it's a, quote, poor excuse of a budget, and it's a political stunt. I'm not sure how spending money is a political stunt, but the teacher pay, 20% by 2020, comes out to about approximately $1.4 billion over the next 24 months. Now, I know some people said, oh, wait a minute, though, but they're going to pull the rug out from underneath you. You might get it this year, but you're probably not going to get it next year. That's why we were very careful in what we wrote. When we said, nope, it's going to be base level K-12 formula funding. It cannot be reduced due to voter protection. Why? Because we put it in the 301 statute. That allows it to be voter protected, which means, yes, in fact, it is permanent, it is ongoing, and oh, by the way, it is inflated. So it's actually higher than the 20%. What else? Well, we heard about additional assistance. Over these next same 24-month periods, you're going to have over $500 million, over $500 million in additional assistance, 100 of it this year. Now, people might say, well, I want more. Well, I think that's a pretty good chunk to start with. What is those two figures going to do? Well, according to the Arizona Auditor General, the average teacher pay in Arizona is $48,300. If you factor in this pay raise, that's going to raise that significantly, and that number stated to be over $2,300 above the 2008 teacher pay level, which includes inflation. Okay, what else is it going to do? Well, since 2016 and 17, it's going to raise the per pupil funding by about 10% from just the 2016 and 17 levels. I think that's pretty significant. Now, I also heard, but wait a minute. The $100 million this year, the $500 million over the next 24 months might not be enough. We have counselors, and we have buses, and we have books, and we have other things, and I get it. Family of teachers, I understand it. I've seen it. I live it every day. I buy my own computer ink so my wife can print all of her stuff. I get it. I see it. So the other couple buckets of money, though, that I reminded our teachers that we have is we do have Prop 123 dollars. Some districts, like mine, did pass an override where you have additional funds. And so if the legislature is going to come in with, over the next 24 months, about $2 billion of new K-12 funding, you could access those other buckets, the 1, 2, 3 bucket, the potential override bucket, and you can use those funds to do whatever else that you might need them to do. I think that's important. But now let's talk about what else this budget does that I heard was a poor excuse for a budget. Well, we fully fund all the JTEDs. I think that's a good thing. Over the same period, we have about $130 million in new school construction. I think that's good. Building renewal fund is about $45 to $50 million plus. The Arizona School for the Deaf and Blind has over $2 million that they need. I spent 6 hours on this floor talking about SROs and behavioral health specialists. That has about $8.5 million of funding in this bill. Higher education is funding. $37 million of higher education for capital funding for resident students and some of the things that we spoke about. $1.8 million in increased funding for critical access care for rural hospitals. I think that's an important piece of funding. Skilled nursing provider rate increases about $3 million. And the thing that I actually mandated the best that I could be in this budget is the full funding for the developmentally disabled community at over $13 million, which people were falsely saying money was being taken from this pot to pay for this raise. That wasn't true. We have $2 million for Alzheimer's funding. We have over $18 million of funding for our counties. We saw another tragedy happen a lot this year, or last year, wrong way driving deaths on our highways and freeways. We have $1.4 million in there to help stop that tragedy. We have a border security strike force of nearly $3 million to help secure our border and keep citizens safe. We have $8 million for our veterans' homes to help our vets. We fully fund our adoption subsidies. And yes, we still even include $2 million for the arts and another $1 million for Arizona food banks, just to name a few. You know, I also heard on the floor earlier today that the budget is our moral document, and it shows what is most important to the state. Well, I believe when all these numbers that I said are fully realized, the state of Arizona and our budget will be spending approximately 54 to 55% of our budget on education. Now, when people say, well, what do you care about? Well, clearly, I think the answer is education. More than half of our budget is spent on education today, and that number increases with this bill. But don't forget, we have the whole rest of the state we have to run. DES and Department of Transportation and access with our health care and corrections and our state parks. And so if people say, well, guess what, Steve, that 54, 55%, that's not good enough. Well, what would you like it to be, 65? 75? How do you run the rest of the state on the limited resources that you have? You know, and finally, I want to talk about, I've heard so much today about compromising. How there was a good budget a few years ago because Some of the people got everything they wanted in it, so that made it a good one. And so what happened to compromise here? When the governor said 1% and the public said 20 and they got the 20, isn't that a compromise? And again, I spent several hours on this floor talking about, the other day, a school safety bill. That was a compromise with Democrat lawmakers to make that bill better. Yet not one Democrat voted for that bill. We have a compromise in this budget, self-admittedly from the Democrat colleagues on this floor, saying, look what you've accomplished, because just a few short weeks ago, you didn't have any of this stuff, prompting some of them to vote yes. Well, isn't that a compromise too? So how is it not a compromise anymore? I think it is a compromise. I understand for some, this might not go where they want it to go, and I get it. But to say that it's not a first step, to say that, again, it's, quote, a poor excuse for a budget, I think that's just inherently wrong. And I think it's a disservice to the teachers who have come down here and to the parents who had to, in many cases, pull their kids out of school for a week to say, you got the money, we got all this extra funding, but it's still a poor excuse for a budget because you didn't get everything you wanted, because you're not compromising the way you asked us to. I think this budget goes a very long way, which is why some of my Democrat colleagues are voting for it. The proof is in the votes. The proof is in the green names. And Mr. President, I want to thank you for your diligence on this and your leadership, and our speaker and our governor and all those that participated. I know it's been a very long process. And I actually do want to thank everybody who's voiced their concerns. I know I met and talked with dozens and dozens and dozens of teachers as well. And so, Mr. President, with that, I vote yes.
Senator Smith votes aye.